All right. Welcome to the Rise Up podcast. I am your host, Jonah Mitchell. And on this show, I do my best to help make things make sense, especially when it comes to your health, your fitness goals. Really just try to make things a little bit easier for you to understand so you can start applying them into your day to day. And so that you can get you to the point where you can rise up to your potential, live the life that you want, and have the body that you want at the same time. Because there is not either or process. Like people often think that they have to do all of one thing to get to get the result and completely abandon their life and their sanity, and that's not the case. And trust me, I've been there. Not fun to be. So I mean, this is part of why I'm doing today's episode, because I'm starting to work with a good handful of new clients to help them. I'm just helping them get started with the really understanding what the pieces that may have worked but didn't last, or they never really lasted in the past. And well, like you saw from the title of the episode, this is all about macros. The three most important things that you need to understand about macros. And it's just these are the things that have helped me coach a lot of people to understand them much more effectively, and so that we can use them appropriately. Now, I will always want to say people need to use these when they're ready, because not everybody's ready for tracking macros. But I want this to be somewhat of an introduction or a reintroduction, so you can see what the deeper, what the what's a good word, or where the root to the numbers actually are, because everyone's just worried about the top of the weed, right? All the stuff that's growing on top, but they don't know the inner workings of the weed below the surface. And once you do understand that, well, then we can see if macros are actually going to be effective. Tracking macros will be effective for you, but understanding macros will always help you no matter what, especially if you're just don't know what food is, right? So, and then if you stick around, I'm going to kind of give you a couple more tips to just understand how to start and some common mistakes that are made when it comes to tracking calories. And then we'll go from there. So thank you so much for listening, and let's kick things off. So simple. The first thing that most people just need to understand is macros make up your calories. All right. So macros making up your calories. For every 1 gram of protein, for every 1 gram of carbohydrates, there are 4 calories. All right, for both. Right. So 1 gram equals 4 for protein, 1 gram equals 4 for carbs, 1 gram of fat equals 9 calories. All right. So this is important to understand. This is why whenever you've tracked in the past, it may have seemed like your fat calories were always way higher than your protein and carbs, because fat is the most calorie dense. And this is also why in like the 90s and the early 2000s, it was fat-free everything. Fat was such a the demonized food back then, because fat would make you fat. No, it's just the most calorie dense, therefore it's easy to overconsume. And coming back to something I love talking about, helping you understand there's no good or bad foods. There are just certain foods that are easier to overconsume. And if your diet is full of foods that are much easier to overconsume, well, then it's easier for you to eat in a calorie deficit, or I'm sorry, a calorie maintenance. Calorie surplus, good Lord, just started from the bottom all the way up to the top there. And when we understand that your calories are made up of your macros, and the only way we can gain or lose weight needs to be the manipulation of our calories. This is why macros can be very, very helpful, right? Because it gives us the ability to make the adjustment if need be. It also gives us the ability to understand if you're gaining weight, well, you're eating in a surplus. If you're losing weight, you're eating in a deficit. If you're maintaining weight, you're eating in a maintenance, right? No matter what the numbers say, what you think you may be tracking, that has to happen, right? These are basic functions that have had to really establish ourselves in our evolution, and I'll get to that here in a second. That is the law of thermodynamics, and just how our body operates with the fuel that we give it. Right. So when so again, this is the basic thing that you need to understand, right? And now the second thing, right, that you're going to need to understand when it comes to your macros is what each macro does. Why do we have different macros for to begin with? What do these calories make up of, or these macros make up of? So protein is essential for all of our cells in our body. Any collagen commercial you've seen, it's a protein, because a lot of hair, skin, and nail tissues have a lot of collagen protein inside of them. So that's why they market those benefits for collagen. But all protein is for all cells. It's the building blocks of all of our cells. It's also the most essential nutrient in that our body needs, meaning we can't produce any form of amino acid without eating it. We can create fatty acids with the carbs and the proteins that we eat. We can create glucose and ATP and sugar with the fatty acids and the protein that we eat, but we cannot create the amino acids from carbs, from fats. So if we do not eat enough protein, we are missing out on a lot of cellular benefits, especially missing out on muscle benefits. Okay, so I'm going to come back to each of these, but I want to give you the main overview first. Protein is essential, and if we are under consuming it, and many people are, we're missing out on a lot of benefits that are going to, one, help our body composition, but ultimately help our body rebuild cells that have aged, that need new building blocks. All right, carbs. Carbs are really simple. They are purely forms of energy. They're not really essential, meaning like like our body doesn't necessarily need carbs. It can thrive, it can still survive pretty well if we mainly eat protein and fat. Carbs are just extra bonuses, extra fuel for the occasion when it's available. It doesn't need to be broken down into major functions like protein and fatty acids would be, but our brain still loves glucose and carbohydrates, and this is where, you know, a lot of people who feel who've been very traumatized in their diet can have they can feel a lot better when they reintroduce carbs, because they're just flooding their body with such usable energy, and it also kind of in the grand scheme of things, well, not grand scheme of things, but just like because of this, right? Our body loves this form of energy. This is where it could be a hard time, like, or this could be why we crave carbs. If we're super low on energy and we have this belief that we need to eat something to get more energy, but a lot of times that could be the counterintuitive. But other things that carbs are great for is, that was weird. My Wi-Fi paused there for a second, but we're back. So essentially what I was saying, the other thing that carbs are really great for is helping our body with recovery. This is where you may have heard getting carbs and protein as a post-workout drink, or a post-workout in general. Carbs helps tell our central nervous system that it's time to wind down and relax and start the recovery process. So again, this could be another reason why, if we're stressed, if we're emotional, we could crave certain carbohydrates, because our brain, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, craves certain things to help it feel better, to help it unwind. But that's some basic functions there. And now dietary fat, right? Dietary fat is essential for the production and creation of certain hormones. It takes the fatty acids in them, and it just helps our body start to produce the essential nutrients that will, essentially, hormones are the taxi drivers. They're the information distributors throughout our body, and having a good amount of dietary fat in your diet, well-rounded dietary fat, so this is, you know, the healthy fats like plant fats, nuts, avocados, and animal fats as well, right? Having a good balance between those two really helps those messaging signals, so that our body can get to the point where it's effectively producing testosterone, estrogen, human growth hormone, cortisol, any of the neurotransmitters, right? And it's also a source of fuel as well. Our brain, or our body, will eventually tap into fatty acid stores, not necessarily body fat. So for all those people who told you cardio burns fat, It's true, but it's not the body fat that many people associate with. But it also is a energy fuel source. Once we get into the cardio level of training, this is where you're training for longer than 2 minutes, probably longer than 3 minutes on a continuous pace, continuous pace before your body starts tapping into its fatty acid stores. Right. So there's many functions that these macros have. Right. They're not just numbers. Right. These numbers help us understand what our body needs personally, right? There's always recommendations and certain adjustments that can be made, right, per the individual. But when we understand, okay, these are deeper, right? Carbs are not just these bad things. Yes, they're not as essential as protein and fatty acids, right? Or and dietary fat, but they still have their benefits. They still have their benefits and they still have their reasons, right? So when we're paying attention to, when we start understanding what these things actually do, right now, I want to move it over to the third thing that you need to know, right? So I want to know that, okay, I want you to know that macros make up your calories, right? And your calories dictate if you're gaining weight, losing weight, or staying the same, right? Now I want you to know that, okay, this is the amount of calories each macro makes up, and this is the main function for each of these macros, right? So now you start to see there's a deeper purpose than just losing weight, gaining weight, because we want to understand the whole, as much of the process as we can, so then we can not only focus on losing weight, we can start understanding how to help our body thrive. And that's where I'm moving into the third thing, right? I want you to understand your biology and your evolution more importantly. Everything we do, and I mean everything, usually has a biological response, an evolutionary response. I was just talking to one of my new clients, and I asked her, why do you think we taste stuff? And she was so confused. She was like, I don't know. But none of us think about that, right? Well, we just eat, we just taste things, right? But this is what I want you to really understand. We are the most adaptable species on this planet. And every adaptation that we've created over the thousands of years of our existence has helped us do the number one thing that's allowed us to continue to evolve as a species. And that is survive. Excuse me. Survive through every single thing that it possibly can. Right? We're not entirely perfect. We can't evolve to every scenario, can't evolve to live in a volcano. But any livable situation, there is a human, there are humans living in that environment. Desert, Antarctica, or are there people living in Antarctica? I'm sure there's somebody living there, right? But extreme cold places, you know what I'm trying to say. And because of this, we want to think of like all the things that have helped us evolve, that are our core functions that just we don't understand, and they get in the way of how we live life today. So going back to what I was saying about carbohydrates, we have cravings because our body's usually trying to tell us something. And because our body can't speak English, it will say, hey, crave this type of food, something sugary, something salty, something with, sometimes you crave salad, vegetables, protein, whatever the craving is, right? It's usually telling that for a reason, because we used to not have as many distractions as we do now. We used to be able to understand and interpret our signals before we had all of the changes of how we create food over the last 50, 70 years, or how our food is produced. And we no longer have to hunt or gather our food. We have a very clear understanding of what is good for us, what is going to keep us alive, and what is poisonous and could kill us, right? And this is not this is not going to be anything super crazy about that, because I want you to understand the basic biology before we go down any other rabbit holes. So cravings, right? If you're craving a sugary food for some reason, there is a biological reason for that. And like I said earlier, carbohydrates help our body recover. Help it recover from stress. So those of us who struggled with stress eating and we've turned to food, there's a reason for it. It's not because we're ignorant and we don't want our goals. Well, somewhere down the line, we associated food as a means to help our body feel better, wind down. And there are parts of it that actually help us feel better. And this is usually what I talk about when it comes to the emotional state with food, is the food makes us think we'll feel better, but that's often not the case. We often feel worse after. We feel guilty, we feel frustrated, we feel annoyed, whatever it is, So now, but there is still a reason for the craving. It could be you're nutrient deficient. If you have a very highly processed diet, meaning your food is not very colorful, it's very low in protein, high sugar diets, right? Again, none of it's bad, right? Like, this is, many people don't know. We've just been living life. We haven't even thought about this stuff. But because of it, we have these cravings because our body's trying to tell us, hey, we're missing water, we're missing vitamins, we're missing protein, we're missing fiber. We need something. But we haven't been able to actually slow down and interpret these things, because those functions of those macros, of those proteins, those carbs and fats, those are the signals that we're getting, that we hear throughout the day, whenever something's going on, if we're craving something, and our body's trying to tell us we need it. And now going back to when I asked my client, why do we taste things? Well, our brain has evolved to associate taste with nutrient density. Before, we've been living our life for the last 50 to 100 years the way that we have, taste was not the main, was not as easily found in many foods. Food, like, everything has to taste good for a lot of people, and that's okay, right? People don't like eating the same thing over and over again. They like the variety of wings, pizza, burgers, fries, because they taste really, really good. That's also a biological response. Our brain has developed this response that something tastes good, it's full of nutrients. Think of thousands of years ago, before we had processed foods. And again, there's nothing wrong with processed foods, but there's ultra processed foods, whole foods. There's a difference. There's different categories. But before we had processed foods, what do you think the tastiest things were out in the wild? Fruit, right? Honey, protein, animal meats. They were very, very tasty. And that helped tell our brain that these things were good for our health, were good for our body. And as we've evolved as a race, well, we still have those basic functions in the back of our head, but we don't need to go hunt and gather our food. We can just enjoy food. But the problem is we still are hitting that taste sensor in our brain when we're eating nutrient devoid foods. Not good or bad, but there's foods that have higher nutrient amounts. There's foods that have lower nutrient amounts. So when we're eating potato chips, for example, if I put 7 potatoes in front of you and said, eat all of these, you would look at me and probably throw the potato back in my face. But if I put one bag of a family-sized bag of potato chips, or whatever favorite flavor potato chip that you wanted, and I said, eat this whole thing, you probably could. But now the difference here is, because those potato chips are so tasty, the same amount of calories of 7 potatoes is in one bag of potato chips. And because it tastes so good, our brain is constantly getting signals that there is a lot of nutrients inside these things, these very tasty, easy to overconsume foods. And every time we eat a little bit, our brain's like, our stomach's like, oh, we don't have as many nutrients as we thought. And our brain says, but it tastes good. So keep eating it, because we're going to get to those nutrients eventually. So just keep eating it. And yeah, potato chips are made of potatoes, but it's not the most whole nutrient dense version of those potatoes, which it's added with extra flavoring, extra oils, right? So it just drives the calories up higher, and now it's not nearly it's nowhere close to the nutrient density that we would even see benefits from eating the entire bag. And then again, going back to the very beginning, if we eat in a surplus, we're going to gain weight. And this is why it's very easy to overconsume processed, very tasty foods, because it's not just your lack of willpower or that you just love food. There's a biological response, an evolutionary response that has been hijacked sometimes. And it's just about understanding what your body's asking for, and then really paying attention to what your goals are. because if you want to lose weight, you have to be in a deficit. And prioritizing easy to overconsume foods makes it harder to be in a deficit, right? This whole thing is connected. So now we're trying to think, okay, well, cravings, taste, those are evolutionary responses, right? So now building muscle is an evolutionary response too. Storing body fat is an evolutionary response. Like these things are a part of how we've been able to stay alive and continue to evolve and live the crazy life that we do now. We're going to space, everything on the internet. There's so many things that are going on right now in the world that we've survived enough to get to ask these questions. And again, it's these biology pieces and these evolutionary pieces. Understanding them helps us get to the root of why we have certain cravings or make certain choices. So body fat is a survival tool. Muscle mass is not is not a necessary thing for survival, but it is an adaptation because we had to carry things, we had to use weapons, we had to travel long distances, and we needed muscle to help our body in those situations, in those scenarios. This is why we build muscle. Body fat is your extra safe energy store for just in case that day food might be scarce. And if your food is scarce, well, it has a bank of energy that's going to do its number, that's going to make sure it keeps you alive. And that's, again, an evolutionary response I need everyone to understand. Your body and your mind only cares about keeping you alive. That's it. That's the evolutionary response. So everything that you do to feel better, every stress that you experience, the old response, our fight or flight response, was a life and death situation. But again, as we've evolved as humans, we don't have that as much. Like there's not always a tiger around the corner about to kill us. But when we're getting cut off in traffic, when we're in a fight with our spouse, when we're stressed about work, like all these are sending stress, fight or flight responses. And to our body, that's a life or death scenario. It can't tell the difference because it's still operating back like when we're cavemen. I want you to understand this because there's nothing wrong with you if you struggled with macros, right? Understanding the numbers is important, but this is the roots beneath the numbers. And this is why we set targets with certain numbers, so that we're sending the signals to these responses in our brain that it can relax. That it has everything that it needs. That it doesn't need to be craving anything else. It doesn't make the stuff go away if we're being quote unquote perfect. But this is what really helps macros start to stick when you realize your body's just trying to communicate with you. And it's been listening to you this entire time. And you just had a hard time listening to it. And when we can start paying attention to that and start resolving a lot of those internal stressors that our body has been dealing with, then when we get strategic with the numbers, well, it won't respond the way that it used to because, well, one, we don't always associate our stress eating with a biological response. We associate it with something I've always struggled with. Yeah, a lot of people do. But it's also a biological evolutionary thing. Well, part of it is eating helps our body relax, especially when people have very stressful days going throughout the day, their appetite's suppressed, right? Because stress is elevated, that fight or flight response is elevated. And when that is elevated, survival is the number one goal. Doesn't care about digestion, doesn't care about your goals, doesn't care about your hydration, just cares about making it through that stress. So when the sun goes down, it's time to wind down, time to relax. Well, then we get really hungry, right? Well, one, a big part of our day was our appetite was suppressed throughout the day. And two, our body's ready to wind down. So food cravings go higher because those things help biologically. So this is a big piece that we want to understand, so that every signal that you get, you can start looking at where it fits in your goals, or you can start looking and seeing what's going on. How stressed am I when I'm having this signal, right? How's my protein looking? Why am I craving very sugary things right now, or very tasty things? Like, is my protein where it should be right now? Is my hydration? Because we also have cravings because we're dehydrated. As our brain, again, can't speak, or our body can't speak English, unfortunately. So the cravings could be coming from multiple directions. So when we hit a certain protein goal that is essential for our cells, essential for our satiety, right? I didn't even cover that in the very beginning, because eating higher amounts of proteins helps us feel fuller for longer. And it also helps our body rebuild and rebuild muscle tissue and retain muscle tissue. So there's a lot of things our body could be asking for, but because it still associates taste with nutrient density, it could be craving the calorie dense stuff instead of the stuff that's actually going to make us feel better and align with our goals. Right? So this is the thing that's really helped click for me, is like everything that we want has a reason for it. And when we start to connect the dots for these reasons, and then we look at okay, this macro does this function. Okay, am I stressed, or am I just not eating enough protein? And it makes it easier for us to pinpoint. And when we start setting targets, like usually I'll have people aim for about 30% protein, 40% carbs, 30% fat for their targets, right? But this, again, that's a sliding scale. Everyone's a little bit different, but that's a more balanced approach, because those will allow us to usually cover almost all the bases of what our body needs for nutrient efficiency instead of nutrient deficiency. And then those cravings, those urges start to go a lot less, and we start to feel a lot better. We start to feel a lot more focused, a lot more energized, and we start to let go of body fat and stored energy a little bit easier, because our body no longer feels like it's stuck in this nutrient devoid, high stress lifestyle. It feels supported because you're giving it the building blocks. And tying it back into the very beginning, when you eat more nutrient dense foods, you feel better, and calorically, a lot of times you eat a lot less, putting you back in a deficit, and your macros make up your calories. And when you consistently eat in a deficit, you will lose weight. This is like they're all connected. When we start to understand these things, right? It's not just about what are your numbers. What numbers do you need to hit all the time? The numbers just help us understand, are we supporting your body the way that it needs to, with the stress that you have going on in your life, with the activity that you have going on in your life, and the recovery that you need. That's what the numbers are going to help us understand. But we really just need to understand what your body needs first before we go set targets, right? Setting targets without knowing you is really just perpetuating the biggest issues of the fitness industry. It's give you a quick fix, give you a quick answer. You go try it, doesn't work out, you get frustrated, you go buy another supplement, you go buy another program. No, we just need to understand what our body's trying to communicate with us. And when we support it with enough hydration, with enough protein, with enough vitamins and minerals, enough fatty acids, enough stress management, a lot of our cravings tend to not go away, but they're not as unbearable, and they're a lot less annoying. And when that happens, we get to look at the numbers a little bit clearly. So after, this is what I really help people understand. And before I ever like say this is your macro target, have fun, right? So when we're thinking about how to start with macros, I want you to think, how much are you currently eating right now? That is going to tell us more than anything else. So I usually don't even get to tracking calories until we address, do you understand macros? Do you understand the cravings that you're having on your body? And do you understand why they're happening? If it's a stress response, if it's emotional response, whatever it is, are we in a much better place of awareness with these things? Because when we are, and we make the adjustments, when we intentionally add fiber, intentionally add protein, and intentionally add more hydration into our diet, we can see a lot of benefits without ever really focusing on the numbers specifically. So that when we start to introduce the numbers, we start to resolve a lot of the common problems that people face. They're inaccurate with their macros. They're inaccurate with their tracking, with their input. And so when we have all those pieces accounted for, we're eating protein in as many meals as possible, getting a protein and color in as many meals as possible, drinking between a half gallon of water to a gallon a day, and being active throughout the day, and working out in an appropriate way, and sleeping a little bit better, dealing with your stress much better, right? This is all understanding those three things. Now our main focus is, how much am I currently eating? And what is my body telling me? Am I consistently losing weight? Am I staying the same, or am I gaining weight? That's all we're trying to understand first before we set targets. Because when we start paying attention to just how much we're eating, either usually the thing that gets in the way, or the thing that happens when we're just paying attention is, well, we track a number that seems a lot lower than we thought, or it seems a lot higher than we thought. And then we can be very confused. Like, oh my God, I'm eating 1,300 calories. That's such a bad number. But hold on, pump the brakes. How do you feel? Are you starving all the time? Do you feel better? Right? Are you sleeping better? And they're usually like, oh yeah, yeah, I am. It's like, okay, cool. If you were really eating about like 1,300 calories and you're a full-grown adult, you'd probably be feeling a lot worse. I mean, it's not impossible to be eating 1,300 calories and it's primarily nutrient-dense foods and you feeling pretty good about it. Like, that's not unusual, you know. But we just want to make sure before we assume that that's actually 1,300 calories, that we've identified all the possible discrepancies, all the issues that may get in the way of your consistency, of your accuracy, more important. Because if you're inaccurate and you're tracking a certain number, it can be very misleading. You could feel like you're eating a lot less and seeing results, and now you have this stuck in your head. You have to eat at that number, or you could be tracking a lot more than you realize, and you could be losing weight. And now we have again a different relationship with that food. So essentially, we just want to understand, okay, how much are we currently eating first, right? Just don't aim for targets, don't aim for none of that. Just worry about how much you're currently eating, and then from there, let's just make sure that we're being as accurate as possible, right? This doesn't mean I don't need you to be like super meticulous where you can't live your life. It's just like, no, this is more like a child's curiosity. Oh, did I make sure that this was cooked chicken instead of raw chicken? Oh, okay. Did I scan the bag, or did I just pick a random option in my Fitness Pal, whatever tracking app that you're using? These are the things that really can add up over time. It's like, oh, it's not, people don't think it can be a lot, but if every single item that you input, it can be slightly off because it's not as accurate as it could be, well, then we can be adding or not accounting for a good amount of calories that could be that would tell us a much the whole picture of your results. But once we worry about how much we're eating, we identify the possible discrepancies, and we just focus on that. We stay consistent. Then we get to say, how are you feeling? Where's your protein at? What's your goal? Right? If you have a muscle or a fat loss goal, and you're 170 pounds and you're only eating about 80 grams of protein, well, we want to try to maintain the same level of calories and increase your protein amount to about 120, 150, like about that range. And that would make sure that we're giving enough building blocks for your body. Because remember, protein is essential. If we don't consume it, we can't produce those amino acids from the other foods that we eat. But if we increase that protein, well, we're going to really, really tell our body that fat loss is the priority, because the fuel that we're getting, the amino acids we're getting for muscle that is not essential for survival, but body fat is. Well, if we're getting that signal to come in because we're eating more protein on a regular basis, our body's going to hear, okay, the environment tells us that protein is in abundance, and if this is a part of their diet, we can store the energy that is going to be needed with this food, which is muscle. Where if we eat in a calorie surplus, and we don't have a training stimulus, and this wasn't about any training stimulus, but I have a couple other episodes that you can definitely go. It's like how to tone up and get fit or something like that. But we have training that tells our body that muscle is important. When we give it the fuel it needs, enough protein for cell health, for muscle development and growth, then our body looks at muscle mass as a resource that is important, where its biological response is that body fat is essential for survival. But we're trying to tell it that it's not. It doesn't need that. All right. So that, again, this is where we make the adjustments based off of what you're doing. So this is what I want you to start paying attention to. If you're someone who struggled with calories, right, or if you're like, you have to hit your numbers, well, I hope this starts putting the dots on what the numbers actually are, so that when we do set targets, they make more sense for you. They actually fit for your life, and they speak to the signals that you're getting from your body that could be based off the environment that you're in and the biological evolutionary responses that we've been programmed, or that have helped keep us alive as the most adaptive species on the planet. When we learn to work with our body instead of work against it, because again, it's not because you're actively trying, is most of the time we're not aware. I didn't know any of this. I was super ignorant to all this. I had no idea what I was doing until like 5 years ago. And I still was just figuring it out 5 years ago. I'm still learning today, but I've been able to put these pieces together to live a life, live a life that allows me to enjoy food appropriately, eat food that helps align with my goals, and not feel miserable. And that's the same thing I want to give to you. It's the same thing I want to do for my clients. If I never speak to you, but I'm able to just help make a couple connections, then I did my job. So this is a long one. This may have been a little bit all over the place, but I hope it made sense. I hope you found it helpful. And if it did, please let me know down below, or leave me a review, and I really, really appreciate it. And if this helped you even a small way, share it with at least one person. Again, I really appreciate the growth of the show. You guys have been slowly bringing up my listening, my listenership for this entire year, and I'm super, super grateful. So I hope you found this episode as helpful as another one that you may have heard. If you want to see any more of my stuff or catch up with me on my personal life, that's all linked in the show notes down below. And yeah, that's all I have. That's all I have for you today. So I hope you have a great rest of your day or night whenever you listen to this, and I'll see you on the next one.